Everyone thinks Google Earth shows everything, but drive through rural Kentucky, and you'll notice facilities that simply vanish from every map. What requires that level of digital invisibility? When you open Google Earth and zoom into the Appalachian Mountains, something strange happens. Massive chunks of land just disappear. Not literally, but digitally. Coal mining companies have managed to make their operations nearly invisible online, and the scale of what they're hiding is absolutely mind-blowing. Over 500 mountains have been completely destroyed in this region. Gone, blown up, flattened, turned into dust. We're talking about ancient geological formations that took millions of years to form, wiped out in decades. The technical term is mountaintop removal mining, which sounds way too polite for what's actually happening here. These mining operations cover roughly 1.5 million acres of land. That's bigger than the entire state of Delaware. Yet, when you search for these areas on satellite maps, you'll often find blurred images, outdated photos from years ago, or sometimes just blank spaces where detailed imagery should be. Makes you wonder what they're trying to hide, right? Take the Hobit mine in West Virginia, for example. This operation was one of the largest surface coal mines in the entire United States, but good luck finding current, detailed satellite footage of it online. The images are either heavily pixelated, or so old they don't show the true extent of the environmental damage. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The mining process itself is brutal and efficient. Companies literally blow the tops off mountains using explosives mines, sometimes the equivalent of a small atomic bomb's worth of force. Then they dump all that rocky debris, called overburden, into nearby valleys. And here's where things get really wild. This process buries entire streams under hundreds of meters of rubble. Imagine a creek where your grandparents used to fish, completely buried under a mountain of mining waste. These aren't just small streams either. We're talking about waterways that have flowed for thousands of years, suddenly gone forever. The mining companies call this valley fill, which sounds almost pleasant until you realize what it actually means. But here's the kicker. Much of this destruction isn't properly documented on the mapping platforms most people use. Google Earth, which has detailed images of almost every corner of the planet, somehow has convenient gaps when it comes to active mining sites in Appalachia. Some areas show imagery that's years out of date, making current mining operations look like untouched forest. The coal industry has significant influence over what gets shown and what doesn't. They've managed to keep their most destructive practices largely invisible to the general public. While you can zoom in on your neighbor's backyard with crystal clear detail, trying to get a good look at active mining sites often results in frustration and blurry pixels. Then there are the abandoned sites, left behind like environmental crime scenes. These present an entirely different set of problems, ones that persist long after the coal companies have moved on to destroy the next mountain range. The real nightmare begins when the mining companies pack up and leave. Abandoned mines scattered across Appalachia create a toxic legacy that's somehow even more invisible than active operations. These forgotten sites leak poison into water supplies while satellite imagery conveniently skips over the mess. Here's what gets really twisted. Many of these abandoned sites just disappear from official records. Companies shut down operations, file for bankruptcy, and suddenly nobody's responsible for cleanup. But throughout Appalachia, dozens of smaller towns simply vanished after mines closed. Residents packed up and left when jobs disappeared, and the environment became unlivable. These places exist in a weird digital limbo, sometimes still labeled on maps even though nothing remains but contaminated soil and crumbling foundations. Well, here's where it gets legally messy. Federal law requires mining companies to restore land after extraction ends. The Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act sounds impressive on paper. In reality, enforcement is spotty, and companies find creative ways around regulations. They declare bankruptcy, transfer assets to shell companies, or simply abandon sites and pay minimal fines. The cleanup costs get passed to taxpayers while the environmental damage persists for generations. And the weird part is how these sites become invisible over time. What starts as obvious industrial scarring gradually fades from public awareness. All vegetation grows back in patches, creating a false impression of recovery from aerial views. But underneath, the soil remains contaminated and groundwater stays poisoned. Satellite imagery captures this deceptive green cover while missing the underlying toxicity completely. Local communities living near these abandoned sites face ongoing health problems, higher rates of cancer, respiratory disease, and birth defects. Yet their struggles rarely make it onto any official documentation or mapping systems. It's like they exist in geographic blind spots, dealing with consequences from operations that officially never happened or have been conveniently forgotten. But the real question isn't just about what we can't see from above, it's about what's deliberately hidden underneath. While abandoned mines leave their scars above ground, the real secrets lie buried much deeper. Deep beneath Appalachia's rolling hills, a maze of facilities exists that you'll never find on any public map. These aren't your typical mining operations. During the Cold War, the government carved out massive underground bunkers throughout the region. The mountains provided perfect natural protection, thick rock shields whatever lies inside from prying eyes and potential attacks. But here's the twist. Many of these facilities never stopped operating when the Cold War ended. Google Earth treats these sites like they don't exist. You might see a small building or an innocuous entrance, but the real action happens hundreds of feet underground. Some of these bunkers stretch for miles beneath the surface. Workers drive golf carts through tunnels to get from one section to another. Makes sense when you're basically working inside a mountain, right? Then there's the waste storage issue that nobody talks about. Remember all that mining we discussed? Well, the most dangerous byproducts had to go somewhere. Certain underground facilities store radioactive materials and toxic chemicals that would make your hair stand on end. These storage sites are scattered throughout remote mountain areas, completely unmarked on satellite imagery. The secrecy gets even stranger when you consider the research facilities hidden in plain sight. Environmental impact labs study mining damage, but their exact locations remain classified. Why? Because some of these studies reveal problems so severe that making them public would trigger massive lawsuits. The government keeps quiet about facilities that monitor groundwater contamination and air quality in the most damaged areas. But the weirdest part is the old military installations that predate even the Cold War bunkers. During World War II, the military established secret training camps and weapons testing sites deep in Appalachian wilderness. Many of these locations were simply abandoned and forgotten about. No cleanup, no documentation, just restricted airspace and no trespassing signs that have been weathered by decades of mountain storms. Let's not forget the communication centers buried beneath seemingly ordinary hillsides. These facilities intercept and relay sensitive government communications. The antennas might look like cell towers, but they're connected to sophisticated equipment housed in reinforced underground chambers. Local residents often have no idea what's really operating in their backyard. Some of these restricted facilities employ hundreds of people who commute to jobs that officially don't exist. They drive to work at coordinates that aren't supposed to be there. Their paychecks come from shell companies with generic names like Mountain Services LLC or Appalachian Technical Solutions. The isolation of these mountain locations provides perfect cover. A facility could operate for decades without attracting attention from anyone except maybe a few curious hikers who get turned away by security guards. And those guards, they're very real and very serious about keeping people out. What makes this secrecy even more concerning is how it connects to the communities living nearby. These hidden operations affect real people in ways that remain completely invisible to the outside world. When mining companies strip a mountain bare, they're legally required to restore it afterward. Well, that's the theory anyway. The reality is that many restoration projects exist in a strange invisible world, missing entirely from Google Earth and other satellite mapping services. These phantom forests show up on government paperwork, but not where people actually look for information. Groups across Appalachia are fighting to rebuild what mining destroyed. They plant millions of trees, redirect streams and try to bring life back to barren rock. But here's the weird part. Successful restoration sites often don't appear updated on satellite imagery for years. Makes you wonder if someone prefers keeping environmental victories hidden, right? Take the effort to restore Buffalo Creek in West Virginia. Local volunteers spent decades replanting native species and cleaning contaminated soil. Their work transformed hundreds of acres from wasteland back into functioning ecosystem. Yet satellite maps still show the area as a brown scar from 2010. The disconnect between reality and digital representation isn't accidental, it's systematic. Then there's the flip side. Mining companies love showcasing their reclamation projects in glossy brochures. They'll plant grass on flattened mountaintops and call it restored habitat. But what they don't mention is that these artificial landscapes can't support the complex ecosystems that existed before. A grassy plateau might look green from space, but it's basically ecological desert compared to the diverse forest that once thrived there. Pollution problems get the same treatment, hidden in plain sight. Stream contamination from acid mine drainage affects thousands of waterways across the region. Orange-tinted creeks and dead fish should be obvious red flags, yet these environmental disasters rarely get marked or labeled on digital maps. Local communities know which streams to avoid, but outsiders scrolling through satellite imagery would never guess the water is toxic. Let's not forget the health impacts that never make it onto any map: cancer clusters in mining communities, elevated rates of birth defects, respiratory problems from coal dust. These human costs of extraction remain statistically invisible, buried in medical reports that don't translate to geographic data points. Small communities fighting back face their own invisibility problem. Grassroots environmental groups organize protests, file lawsuits, and document pollution violations, but their efforts rarely show up in mainstream mapping services or geographic databases. It's like they're fighting ghosts, powerful corporations with vast resources against neighbors who can barely afford legal fees. The most frustrating part: some areas have been written off entirely. Large sections of former mining land sit abandoned, too contaminated for development but not valuable enough for proper cleanup. These sacrifice zones exist in mapping limbo, not quite industrial sites anymore, not quite natural areas either. They're environmental purgatory, maintained in digital obscurity. What's really happening in Appalachia's hidden recovery zones challenges everything we think we know about environmental restoration. The region's future hangs in the balance between corporate interests and community resilience, playing out in spaces that most people will never see, either in person or online. The mountains remember what was lost, even when the satellites forget to look.